I don't see the organizers, but I guess we start. We are into the right time frame by now. Good morning for the second panel of today. My name is Peter Wagner. I'm the head of the support group Ukraine, and I have the honor and pleasure to moderate now the second panel, which, like the first one, is a bit extremely wide. The first one was security. The second one is information and disinformation. Both cover a lot of issues. The one this morning has, for me, the fascinating facet, which we discovered at the breakfast meeting with some other colleagues, that it is a topic which probably 6 years ago, nobody would have organized a panel on this. We are talking about worked disinformation, fake news, etc., which didn't exist with their current connotation 5, 6, 7 years ago. Now everybody is keen at doing it. And why? Because it's a real threat to all of us, to our Western economies and societies and values. And therefore, I'm also quite happy to have found out that most of the speakers today have some kind of direct media, press, journalistic, information background. So in addition to having three eminent representatives of the parliaments of Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, we also have people who know a bit about the thing that they are talking about. And I think we start with a quite open, general first introduction before afterwards we will go into a bit more of a structured debate and also have a possibility for you to ask questions. And I introduce the speakers as they come, and the first on the panel is Mr. Sergi Kavanaadze, Deputy Speaker of the Parliament of Georgia. Welcome, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Since we just give the general remarks in the beginning, I would fully agree that 5 years ago or 6 years ago, this issue was not as acute as it is now. If you look at the numbers, for instance, with regard to support of European integration in Georgia, and compare the numbers in 2013 and 2017, end of 2017, you will see a certain decline. For instance, in end of 2013, 86-87% wanted to join EU. December 2017, these numbers have dropped to 72%. It's still high, but there has been about 15-point drop. The NATO, November 13, 80% wanted to join NATO. December 2017, 64%. Those who disapproved the idea of joining NATO in Georgia has increased from 10% to 26%. And this has all happened in the last 5 and 6 years. Now, I'm not saying that this has all happened due to the Russian disinformation and the Russian exposure of the soft power here, but it certainly has played a serious part in this. And in the Georgian case, I think everybody across the political spectrum now recognizes this as a main challenge. It's not only the civil society or the opposition parties, but also the government recognizes it, and even in the state security services report for the last 2 years, we have seen this as a threat which has been identified and even written in the document, which does not happen often on these kind of issues. So that is a serious challenge for us. And if you look at how this challenge plays out in the case of Georgia, you see that there are different instruments that Russia is using. And I'm sure these are the instruments also which are widely used in the other Eastern Partnership countries. This is, first of all, the media outlets. But in our case, it's mainly not the Russian language media outlets, but the Georgian language media outlet. It is TV, but also the print newspapers, which have become a serious challenge. The editorial policy they have adopted, which is very close to the Russian message box. That is also political parties. In Georgia, we have unfortunately witnessed in the last years the mainstreamization of the pro-Russian political parties. They don't only make it to the parliament and create a faction there, which, by the way, they lost now because of whatever other reasons, but they are also at the forefront of the politics, including during the most important elections. And so if you look at the numbers that they get, if 6, 7 years ago, they would have been at the margins, and they would have only got 1, 2, 3%. Now these numbers have increased to double digits. And once again, fortunately, we are not in the situation when we have a serious increase of their support. But nonetheless, the trend is still worrying. And I think that this trend needs to be seriously taken into account by all actors in Georgia, because if that trend is not stopped and reversed, at a certain point it might be very hard to challenge it. And finally, just to say a few words, what can be done about that? I'm a very strong supporter of the freedom of speech, and I believe that even those organizations or the media outlets or the political parties who want Georgia to lose its sovereignty and to go back to the Russia's orbit, I think even they have the right to express themselves. So I don't believe that it is the best option to limit their freedom of expression. However, I think the legitimate instruments that can be used against this is to counter the Russian financial resources which are coming into the country and are financing all kinds of events which are the cornerstones of this propaganda. And I also think that the best way to counter it is through the increased transparency. I think one of the main shortcomings of our policies in the last years has been that it has been very intransparent who finances which media outlets, where the money comes from, also including the transparency of the budgetary resources of the Georgian state budget. And we have had a number of occasions where those funds have gone to the editions or to the organizations who are the proponents of Russia here and who are the kind of main drivers of the Russian propaganda in the social media or outside of that. And also, and the final point is that we have unfortunately not had a very aggressive counter-propaganda campaign. I don't believe that you should counter propaganda with counter-propaganda, but you can certainly counter propaganda with the concrete actions that go back, that elucidate, for instance, that fact-check or that shed light on some of the claims that Russia has had. And I think that has been also the main shortcoming, which has been very well used by Russia. And particularly, this is problematic on the occupied regions. In the last days, we have seen the outrageous news how a formerly U.S.-administered and now the Georgian-administered so-called Lugar laboratory, which is in Georgia, how this has been producing all kinds of, the maladies and spreading them to Russia, including testing on the human beings, which by any common sense, but by any standard, is an outrageous news, and nobody really believes it. It is so fake in its nature. However, the problem is that if you then look at the, for instance, social media fora in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, in the occupied regions, you will see that there is an overwhelming support of this message box, and they are very much swallowing this as something which is a reality without even doubting its, without even asking the questions that common sense would require to be asked. And I think that is a serious challenge, and unfortunately we haven't done that. And I believe it's also the same challenge for the other countries here, where the propaganda is too permeable to the occupied regions, to the conflict regions, and there's not much we are doing to counter that there. I think I'll stop here, and then maybe we can discuss the other issues during the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very concise but still a comprehensive description of what is going on in Georgia. The next speaker would be Mrs. Mihaela Spatari, who is a member of the Committee on National Security, Defense and Public Order, but also heavily involved in information issues in her country. Please.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really actually honored to addressing this interparliamentary assembly, mainly because a great idea in such a short time became reality, and we are here. What connects our countries actually is related to our past and to our future. Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine has shared a cultural and historical proximity, but now our connection is mostly based on our common vision of the future, and also the common way we're pathing. Our strong cooperation in the last years is actually strongly linked with the benefits and interests of the region, a close approach to European Union, stabilization, security, and the so-called interdependence. All three countries are, I may say, key stability and security factors for the whole region. And the European integration is now the main driving force of the reforms and development of our countries. Because we face common features, we also face common challenges. And what also links us is propaganda. Back in time, we had the Soviet propaganda, but now we have another type of propaganda, a more new, more developed one. The difference is that we are now independent states, we have national consciousness, and we can build by ourselves our vision for the future. The region is lately a target of the new hybrid threats that are aimed to the security of our informational space. There is a regional agenda to erode the support for the Western values that is mostly visible after the 2014 conflict in Ukraine and after the revised military doctrine of the Russian Federation. The propaganda actually targets the values we are sharing and want to fully acquire: rule of law, equality, freedom, human rights, by misusing the Western concepts of freedom of speech and media freedom. The informational space is actually used to influence politics mainly by the means of disinformation and interference in our young but democratic processes. The fake news actually directed to question and doubt the current states in our countries and the public order. Now, in Moldova, I cannot say that we have a fully secured informational space. Through using propaganda in the informational space, people are incited to anti-West feelings, confusion, and fear is instilling. Mostly fake news about European integration are promoted, and Western values are actually presented as not being compatible with our history and with our culture. And negative attitudes toward our main strategic partners are promoted, mainly European Union, NATO, USA, Romania, Ukraine. Using actually the shield of European values, freedom of expression, freedom of media, in Moldova there is an agenda of propaganda and media aggression. There is an even bigger problem in the Transnistrian region, where the visual public space is dominated by media from the uncontrolled region and media from outside, that is severe, influenced, and polarized. We managed to change the audiovisual code through the so-called anti-propaganda law in Moldova and forbid internationally military analytical programs that are not produced in European Union, USA, Canada, or other states that didn't sign the Transborder Convention, the European Convention on Transborder Television. It is actually a temporary measure, but it's important to limit the outside influence on society perception. It's a necessary one. Actually, data showing at the beginning of this year that 70% of the population of Moldova are informed from the television, and 40% of them are produced in the Russian Federation. So how actually should we act when countries where that do not have freedom of press or freedom of media take advantage of our democratic values to misinform? The propaganda is actually severe, promoted through a wide network of the distributors, mainly different social media influencers, politicians, NGOs, research institutes, and very different groups. We need actually to make sure that countries that have hostile intentions toward us can't influence our agenda or our regional agenda. This is actually decreasing the state sovereignty, threats state security, and diminish the economical development for the whole region. Because of the disinformation, voters are misinformed or less informed, and they cannot make their decisions based on facts. This could then influence our elections decision, then the trust in the society. Actually, it's a vicious circle, and one way to break it faster is to work together. I'm glad that today we are talking about launching a new, very interesting idea, a trilateral center for strategic communication. Our actually common role through this interparliamentary assembly is intensifying the cooperation in the democracy, economy, health, and justice fields, but also finding ways to fight the new hybrid threats, and mainly the anti-Western propaganda and the disinformation. The Trilateral Center for Stratcom should be launched as a response to a few concerns and needs that we have as a region, being 3 countries. First is the need to find a regional answer for a common problem, which is the threat to our informational security. Second concern, as I mentioned earlier, is the concern that countries that have hostile attitudes toward us can influence our internal politics back home. They need to build a resilient informational environment and protect better our informational space. Thus, working together will make more things possible than working each of us by ourselves. And the fourth but not the least is the need to focus on our efforts to advance our common interests, having a message that is common. We have actually different experience in treating hybrid threats. That means that measures that we are already working in our countries, they are different. We also need to work together on analysis of disinformation, having a common response team to disinformation. The center could also be a platform to work and exchange between different institutions at different levels. A secure future for the region is actually strongly related on the way we'll manage to work better on hybrid threats and having a common Stratcom agenda. And maybe it's not politically correct to say, but I also think that more than ever we should aim to communicate people and also make sure that citizens are making their decision based on their interests, on states' interests, and not in the interest of influence groups and mainly from outside. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Spatari. And we go straight to the third speaker, who is Mr. Andriy Nemirovsky, Chairman of the Subcommittee on the Prevention and Counteraction of Corruption in the field of environment and environmental protection in the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine.
Доброго дня, шановні колеги, шановні друзі. Дозвольте подякувати за високу честь виступити у стінах цієї авторитетної установи. Історія колись з'єднала наші народи в межах однієї з найбільш кривавих імперій в історії. Навіть після свого розвалу ця імперія не хоче відпускати нас від себе, зі своїх обіймів. У цьому плані, справді, ми є народними побратимами.
One moment, please. I think the interpreters, we don't get them on our earphones. Do you get them? No? Are the interpreters hearing us?
Okay. Okay. На російському?
No English?
Не думаю, что на русском будет интересно.
Okay, 1 minute they are bringing in a relay. Okay. Yes? Okay, so they only can speak English or Russian. They don't have
Okay.
any other kind of interpretation, sorry.
I understand. Троллинг. Начнем сначала? Так, никто не понял. История когда объединила наши народы кровавым режимом. Режимом, который правил нашими странами очень долгое время. правил и не хочет отпускать до сих пор из своих объятий. В этом плане мы действительно есть народами-братьями. У нас общие задачи, общие взгляды на наше будущее, но без путинского режима, без России, без Москвы. Мы все двигаемся в западном направлении. В этом у нас есть одна цель и одна мета. Сегодня Москва и ее руководство все меньше скрывают свои реваншистские намерения возобновить, если не сам Советский Союз, то абсолютный вплыв на наши народы, влияние на наши народы, на нашу жизнь, на наше будущее. С этой целью русским сделан очень сильный пропагандистский аппарат, аналогов которому в истории мировой еще не было. И этому аппарату может позавидовать и Гитлер, и Геббельс, так как им даже не снилось такие возможности, которые сейчас существуют с созданием новых технологий, которые есть. Высокотехнологические методы массовой информации, в первую очередь это телевидение, интернет. Еще несколько лет назад снимали группы русского... Тяжело разговаривать на русском языке.
Can we just maybe, when will the interpreter have arrived? Because then maybe we can start.
Они могли являться в любое время, в любой точке нашей планеты.
No, they said someone would come later. There's someone who has not yet arrived, if I understood the information well. No? Ah, okay.
Целые армии ботов, работа в интернете, которых оккупировали все форумы, все интернет-сайты, все ресурсы. С этим столкнулась не только Украина, но и в первую очередь была сначала Молдова, потом была Грузия, теперь Украина. Естественно, что в ваших двух странах история немножко забыла то, что было раньше. На данный момент с развитием технологий в наших странах, в нашей стране, мы идем в очень большой конфронтации и имеем очень большое влияние от русского телевидения, от русских СМИ и от русской пропаганды. В первую очередь, работа десятков или сотен интернет-ресурсов и информационных агентств, которые зарегистрированы и под видом европейских, можно украинском языке? На украинском. Ukrainian.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm Russian.
Okay. Then maybe I think we have to. Maybe we can, Mr. Ambassador, can you maybe start first, and I tried. We see whether we find a solution for the Ukrainian interpretation. Okay, so there is an interpreter on his way now. So maybe, Mr. Ambassador, if you would start and you come back later on, if that is acceptable for you. Apologies.
Well, thank you very much everyone, and thank you to my colleague from the Verkhovna Rada for trying so hard. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Justin Mackenzie-Smith, the British ambassador to Georgia. It's a great honor to be here with you on Tbilisi-Soba, the city day of Tbilisi, which throughout the centuries has been a great meeting place for people from across Eastern Europe. And before I begin, I just want to congratulate all three parliaments on this initiative. I think it's an excellent initiative and reflects the critical role that all three parliaments are playing in defining the future of your countries. On the issue of disinformation and counter-propaganda, as all the speakers have said, this is a common issue that we all face, whether in Ukraine, Moldova, or Georgia, or indeed in the United Kingdom as well. And I would say that I have learnt so much from practitioners and experts and parliamentarians in each of your countries about the issue of disinformation. So it is it's an area where your knowledge and your experience, your first-hand experience, is very valuable indeed. Very valuable indeed. I'm going to say a few things about the practicalities of responding to disinformation, but first of all, two comments. One, in my remarks, I will mostly talk about disinformation coming from Kremlin-supporting, Russian-supporting sources. There are many other kinds of disinformation in all of our societies today, but the most immediate, the most threatening, I would say, is that which comes from Russia-supporting sources. And the second thing I'll say is I won't touch on the connection between disinformation and cyber warfare, cyber attacks. There has been a lot of focus on this in the UK and the international press this week, but there is a very important connection between disinformation and hostile cyber attacks, and that might be something we come to in our discussions. What I want to say by way of introduction are three things. One, from the UK experience, how do we respond? Number one. Number two, the role of parliaments. And number three, from the point of view of governments, what can governments do? What can governments do? Firstly, how to respond. In our discussion so far, for understandable reasons, we have talked about how we defend ourselves, how we protect ourselves. I would say we mustn't forget how we positively project and promote what it is we stand for. I would say, in many ways, that is our strongest form of defense. Let me use some recent examples to illustrate what I mean. After the attempted assassination of Sergi and Yulia Skripal in Salisbury in March of this year, we have seen 46 different versions from Russian sources of what happened in that city in March. We have seen an avalanche, a storm of disinformation. A storm of disinformation. Now, we have tried to expose this disinformation, we as the government, but also, very importantly, independent media, civil society organizations have been exposing each of these lies, basically, and that's very important. And I pay credit to organizations, for example, in Georgia, the Media Development Foundation, and in each of you, in Moldova and Ukraine, I know there are also very effective stop fake organizations, and they need support. They need support. Sergi Kапanazi mentioned the attacks on the Lugar Center. This is happening elsewhere as well. In Armenia, I was reading this morning about in Armenia, there are similar attacks as well. And one piece of information said that the United States has biological weapons centers in 400 countries around the world. Now, when you think there are actually only 195 countries in the world, you begin to see how ridiculous some of this disinformation is. But it has an effect, as Sergei said. It does have an effect on certain audiences. So I think it is important to allocate the resources to exposing this disinformation. But there's another level. There's a second level, which I think is even more important. Because just by countering propaganda with information, we are not going to defeat it. I think the other level is by emphasizing in a positive way the values and the principles of each of our societies. And we've seen this in the case of Skripal and Salisbury, that by carefully, meticulously following the rule of law in how we have responded to this attack on our country, we have pushed back, we have exposed what is unlawful, what is illegal. This kind of disinformation, it operates in the shadows, in the grey areas, in the darkness. And I think it's true that working together and by shining a light on this kind of activity, we can expose it and we can reduce its harm. The second thing I want to say is about the role of parliaments. I think parliaments have a critical role in helping to tackle disinformation and counter-propaganda. You have the closest connection with society, the closest connection with your voters, the closest connection with the public. And I think that connection is extremely important. I also think that you have a responsibility to hold governments to account as well on what they are doing in the face of this threat. And governments have many, many things to deal with, but I think Parliament can play a constructive role by encouraging a coordinated government response. Lastly, the third thing I wanted to say was about that government response. Peter began by saying that we have increased our focus on this in the last 5 or 6 years. That's true, but the issue of strategic communications is not new. This year in the United Kingdom, we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of our government communications service. So the issue of how governments communicate is not new. What is changing are the tools for communication and the context of that communication. But it's a critical part of legitimacy, accountability, and as Sergei said, transparency as well. My final thoughts are, for effective communication, it needs to be done from the very beginning. It cannot be an afterthought. It needs to come from the center, it needs to be coordinated. And I would also say that for governments to communicate effectively, there has to be a clear distinction between what is government communication and what is party political communication as well. If the trust of our societies, the trust of our audiences are to be maintained. My final thought, thank you very much for your attention, but my final thought is I think this is a little bit like learning to ride a bicycle. You can read a book about learning to ride a bicycle. You can go to a training course on learning to ride a bicycle. You can go to conferences about learning to ride a bicycle. But until you actually start to ride a bicycle, you will not do so effectively. And my encouragement to the parliaments, to the governments in this region is to start doing this. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now, I understand that unfortunately the interpreter is with the speaker at the moment, so we are not in a position to offer Ukrainian interpretation. I very much appreciated that you made a heavy effort, and it's also for many other reasons not easy to do it from Russian or English. So I don't know whether you want to see whether we react later on to some of the questions again, and we'll maybe take a few questions and comments from the audience. Is that okay for you? Yeah, so apologize. Thank you very much. Then maybe based on what we heard already and some of the issues discussed earlier on, let's see whether we can get questions from the audience on these issues of transparency, of how to counter information, and of course there is the big question always of how do normal rules of information apply in times of war, in times of threats. But let's see, are there people in the audience who have questions to some of the panelists or comments, statements on any of the remarks heard so far? No? Then I try with a question. Oh, voilà. Sorry, Mr. Galler.
The black one. Yeah. Good. I mean, we are not only in these countries that are assembled here exposed to what we are discussing here with fake news, but all over in the European Union, I think, and beyond, of course. Well, I think the easiest answer to propaganda and fake news is to put against that the truth. And it's as simple as that. It's definitely, we should not start producing fake news about Mr. Putin and his personal surrounding or his family or something like that. That would really be below our standards. I think it is definitely enough to correct wrong information by putting the truth. But that is at the same time the difficulty. How can we get our citizens and the general public accept or have the confidence that what comes from us is true? Because I think one of the real dangers of this Russian very sophisticated propaganda is, and as you, Ambassador, rightly said, there were 46 versions simply of this Salisbury thing. We could go to the MH17 shooting down, and there we've had also probably dozens of versions what has been the case. Even probably allegedly in the Russian TV, there are sometimes discussions on issues where there might, one of the 6 things might even be close to the truth, but the other 5 also add to the irritation and the situation that at the end, and that is the real objective in my mind, is that either nobody knows what is the truth, or, and that is the most dangerous thing, in my mind politically, to be in a situation that everybody is allowed to have its own truth, so that everything is relativated and nothing firm actually can give orientation to the general citizen. And in order to, and that is a call to all of our governments and decision makers, is in order to be believed that what we say is true, or not closer or relatively true, but that is the truth, is of course that there is this general confidence in the public on, be it to the media, our own media, or what the official statements of the governments are. And of course, that is difficult in countries that are in transition, where there is strong political confrontation, and where there is no, shall I say, mechanism to establish or to have instances, institutions that are beyond this, be it partisan or opinion struggle. So I would wish that when a government speaker in any EU member state or candidate country or Eastern Partnership country, when there is an official statement from a government, I would wish that we come to a situation that the general public would say, okay, that is definitely so. And in this regard, a lot needs to be worked on in order to have or regain or sustain this credibility. In so far, I wonder which mechanisms or which strategies are you obtaining in your given countries in order to come to this point, and that it is what you present as the truth, which is the truth, is not only one of several options that might be true.
Thank you very much. That's a rather complex question to the audience. Do you want to try, before we then see whether there are other questions, to give a reply to it? In other words, what is happening in your countries to gain trust into the institutions so that what is coming from there is perceived by the citizens as being truth, because it is the truth? Anyone wants to try and answer to that?
Well, it's not really an answer, but I will just maybe have a few points on that, a few comments on that. So I fully agree that is a challenge, because when a politician speaks out, for instance, on the Lugar lab and denounces it as fake news, it is not necessarily the best way for the message to trickle down to an ordinary Russian-speaking babushka that lives in an Armenian minority-populated region of Georgia. So not necessarily this is the best way to deliver the message to her. And it doesn't matter which political party you represent in this case, whether you're the government, the opposition, or whether you're the civil society for that matter, because one of the problems that you would have would be in our case, the language of communication. I think one thing that is clear also from the polls is that the regions which are the most vulnerable in our case are the ones who residents of which do not necessarily receive the news in the Georgian language. So when that particular old lady has tuned on TV and got the news that the Americans are testing on human beings in Tbilisi in Russian language, and then she opened a newspaper the next morning or a week later and also got the same news, is it really the right way to counter it with the let's say, talking heads from different political parties or NGOs speaking prime time on TV that she does not watch? So I think that is a big challenge that we have here. Now, one way to counter that problem would be to have the same language communication instruments, whether that is the Russian language or whether that is the local language that they have, which we actually do not have today. So that is unfortunately a reality. If you look at the print media, the Georgian print media, which is extremely pro-Russian, xenophobic, I would say. The pro-Russian does not necessarily mean that they are arguing that we should re-embrace Russia. They are promulgating the same message box that Russia is, about the strength of Russia, about the so-called Georgian values, about the about the problems that the West has, and things like that. So, and you don't really have anything to counter it in the Georgian language print media. That's the reality, unfortunately. And the same is in the Russian language TV. You don't really have a Russian language TV that would be countering it with truth, not with counter propaganda, but with truth. So I think there is a big disconnect in the instruments that are being used to counter that. And once again, I fully agree that the non-governmental sector in Georgia, as well as the government through different institutions it has, such as the European and Euro-Atlantic Integration Communication Center, which is now with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they are undertaking a number of activities with regards to the seminars, lectures, the outreach activities in the regions. I just don't think that is a sufficient way to counter what is trickling down through the mainstream media. So I think that we have that big challenge and that big disconnect, which is not really easy to deal with. And the second point I wanted to still make here is we all speak about the fake news and how to counter the fake news, but one of the reasons why the number of supporters of the Western integration project in Georgia has been declining, and the number of those who've been against it has been raising, is also because we need to have more and more deliverables on our Georgia-EU relations track, so to say. And I think that is an essential thing to understand for us, because the recent big deliverable we've had has been the first of all, association agreement, DCFTA, and then the visa liberalization. And so we're still kind of working based on the hangover from the visa liberalization. It is still quite good. But as time will pass, there will be the kind of fatigue, and still the questions will be raised, so what else, what is coming next? So I think this is also something to be kept in mind, because only countering with the fake news, unless you really have more and more concrete deliverables with regard to the relations with the EU or with regard to relations to NATO, I think we are prone to see drop in the numbers even further. And that is a fertile ground for the ultra-right, far-right, populist political forces to use this for their own benefit, to strengthen their positions, and to stir even further skepticism towards the statehood, but also towards the Western values, which unfortunately we have seen in Georgia, as I said, in the last years.
I guess this question is actually very, very challenging also for us, because it happens a lot of times that a lot of fake news are also promoted by different politicians. I will give you, as example, Moldova, where we have a 50-50 support. I mean, 50% for European Union, for Western values, and 50% that mostly support the so-called custom union led by Russian Federation. So it happens a lot of time that for it's in interest of the politicians for gaining political support to support one message or another. And I guess this is a problem, maybe not for Moldova, but also for the whole region. But building trust, I guess it will be a process that will need a lot of time in our societies, because it's also about changing mentalities. Having a Soviet past where the state was everything, it's very hard to go further and understand that now you have more parties, you have another type of state, you have institutions that are independent, that are not influenced by politics. Because it happens a lot of time that a person from a village sees the doctor, the policeman, and as being part of the political parties that is in the government. So this is a vision that should be changed and can be changed only by time. And of course, taking out the politics out of a lot of state institutions where the politics shouldn't be involved. This is also a process we're working on, but I guess it will take some time to change mentalities.
Thank you. When it comes to the question of deliverables, etc., Ambassador, how do you see this?
I agree with the previous two answers. I also agree that it will take time. I don't think there is a simple solution, a simple response. I think it is as I tried to say in my opening comments, I think it's a multi-level response as well. There is the calling out the disinformation, exposing the disinformation. But I do worry that we all become too defensive, that we go into a sort of defensive position, which makes us more vulnerable, in fact, I think we need to have confidence and project that confidence. And I hope it is not too simplistic an answer, but I also come back to the importance of focusing on building the institutions in our society. Because if those institutions have strong foundations, if those institutions have credibility, then this disinformation becomes almost irrelevant and trivial. That's a long-term process, but I don't see an alternative.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions from the audience by now? Yes, please.
I have two questions. One goes to the delegate from Moldova. We know that the Moldovan government has recently banned the Russian news programs, and for that reason it was really heavily criticized by some European institutions. And the reason for banning was to fight against fake news and anti-Western propaganda. My question would be how would you assess the banning? Was it beneficial for fighting the fake news and anti-Western propaganda? And if you could elaborate on the reasons why it was criticized by the Western institutions. And the second question would go to all the panelists. One of the aims of establishing this parliamentary assembly is to share experience and help each other in among other things, countering anti-Western propaganda. And as we know, the European Union has also set up a center of excellence for countering this propaganda. What practical instruments could be used for cooperation between the three countries and the European Union agencies? How would you see the cooperation between the association agreement countries and European Union member countries in cooperating in this field? Or if there are any practical instruments that could be shared. Thank you.
Do you want to start? And then I guess for the EU, I would have to answer some of the questions. Okay.
Okay. Actually, as I said, previous data shows that 70% of the people in Moldova are informed from television, and between 40 and 45 from the Russian television. This was the data at the beginning of the year. Indeed, the law entered, we voted the law. The last week we also voted again the audiovisual code because we had the process with the president. The law went to the president, then came back in the parliament. So we had another vote on the new audiovisual code, including the same issue. Of course, there were a lot of opinions about the law. On one hand, it's important to because it's hard to say we need to ban disinformation. So maybe it sounds a little bit tricky even for us. So on one hand, yes, we need to do that. It was important because a state that doesn't respect the freedom of speech shouldn't influence the way how our internal politics go. And as I said, we have 50% of people who are in a way, okay, not 50, but around 50, 40, 50 that are supporting, are okay with with the Russian influence or media influence in the country. Or that means that these people actually watch the news. And it's an important electoral segment that was informed from this news. From the electoral point of view, of course, some politicians were against that law, and it was an issue to debate. On the other hand, the criticized were because of the limited freedom of media in Moldova. This was the main critics that were brought to this law. Because the law was actually very short. It's about forbidding the informational, analytical, and military programs produced in the states that are not USA, Canada, European Union, or states that didn't ratify the Trans-Border or Trans-Frontier Convention on television. In the society, of course, the perception was that we're closing all Russian television, which was not correct. Like all the media or cultural programs, they still remained. But for politicians, again, as answering the previous question, it was very good to say that we're banning all the television and for people to feel, in a way, insecure that they will not watch what they liked to do previously. And maybe if it's okay to answer the second question now. The idea of launching this trilateral strategic communication center, I think it's a very good one if we'll manage to do it and to have a perfect format to do it, finding a cell, also to communicate, sharing experience, but most of all, I think to responding to incidents and changing information about different incidents. Because we have different, as I said before, we have different experiences in tackling informational security and hybrid threats. And they're very different because what we had what we have back in our countries is different, even if there are some common points. That's why I guess it's very important also through this strategic communication center to get also the cyber part of the informational security, also to involve the national CERTs, the governmental CERTs, to discuss maybe more about also how to protect critical infrastructure, but mostly to find a strategy of communication, what we communicate to people. And I think the point of communicating the truth and finding, treating hybrid threats through communication, I guess this would be the answer for all of our countries.
We should in a moment also have Ukrainian interpretation, but maybe I quickly take the question of what can the EU do. Now, we are testing ourselves still different approaches. What the EU is doing at the moment in Ukraine is largely a three-pillar approach, because generally in the EU, in the member states, the banning, etc., we understand that there can be war-related situations which change the situation. But in the normal situation of an EU member state, banning of websites, blocking of TV channels, etc., is not the approach we take. What we take and what we're also trying to do now in the countries is, firstly, to fight disinformation. And this is not counter-propaganda, whatever, but this includes issues like, and references were made, helping in training for media literacy, but also just in seeing that the information that we have and what we do is out in a transparent way across the country using as many as possible media channels. Secondly, it's the question of strategic communication, meaning we are, and it's a difficult process sometimes, moving away from reporting that we were building, co-financing that bridge, we were helping here or there. We try to add a layer, and that is really about the EU as a whole and as the bilateral relations as a whole. So there is a series of TV spots, for example, accompanied by newspaper ads, etc., which really inform in general terms and not in these numbers and budgets, etc., but what is also on the emotional side in it, on the creativity side, for entrepreneurs, in the DCFTA. Decentralization is a big project we are supporting in Ukraine. And then there is a third dimension which was indirectly touched upon. We are trying to increase our support to the development of independent media. And that is, depending on the country, a wide range of issues. That is, on the one hand, public broadcasters, which in many countries still could and should be further strengthened. But it's also very much training and support to local media. So we're also there trying, as you indicated, to go really down to the people, because many of these rumors come up from somewhere in the bottom, and then they create this fire which spreads out rapidly. So that is what we are trying to do. I visited myself, for example, on Tuesday, the Center of Excellence for Hybrid Threats in Helsinki, which is a NATO and EU member state organization. 18 members at the moment, more and more are coming in. They are open to share best practices and to help in finding experts that can, in the partner countries, inform, but they are not yet themselves in a situation where, in addition to dealing with it in their 18 member states, they could help outside. This is even something that is still built up within the EU. And as I said, the introduction, 5 years ago, nobody would have understood what is it, a center for hybrid threats. Nowadays, everybody knows that it is something and that it is something that is needed. So, if I understand well, I can stop now here, and there is now an opportunity, finally, for Mr. Nemirovsky to present the Ukrainian perspective. In Ukrainian. In Ukrainian you should be able to speak now.
Доброго дня ще раз. Вибачаюсь, не можу спілкуватися на мові окупанта.
No? But someone was signaling that he could speak. Sorry. No? Not yet. Sorry.
Ще нема?
Some more minutes. I misunderstood the
No
signal
problem.
coming from there. But let's then maybe go quickly to the speakers on an issue that came up, and that is the importance of local media in this whole exercise, on the one hand, so building up, but also what was referred to notably by Mrs. Spatari, the joint exercise. So that in addition to, let's say, what is going on, what are the bottom layers of the discussions, and what is the value added of having a joint center? Which kind of exchange possibilities and needs do you see there? Are there concrete ideas in the countries?
Well, once again, I think that these kind of coordinated efforts are important, and you need to, however, fill them with the concrete steps and the concrete projects and initiatives. So it's a new idea, and let's see what comes out of it. But the pulling together of the efforts can certainly be useful. Now, once again, few things that I've already mentioned that I want to stress here under this question now is that, so the following. First of all, I think what matters is that we support those who are able to counter the propaganda. So I wouldn't necessarily pigeonhole them in terms of whether it's the local or national or regional or whatever, but simply whatever works. In some areas, this could be the local ones, in the other ones, it could be regional ones, in the others, it could be the ones who have the satellite coverage, or it could be internet elsewhere. So once again, whatever is useful in a particular setting. Same is true, for instance, for the outreach to the occupied regions. I don't think you can expect to have the physical outreach to this region, so you might want to think of social media, or think of some kind of TV, which once again can easily be jammed or somehow hindered on the other side. But the opportunities that are given to us by social media can certainly be quite plentiful. For instance, if you take the case of Abkhazia, in Abkhazia you have around, I think, 30,000 people who are online on Facebook, and they scroll through Facebook on a daily basis. I think it's rather easy to target them with the concrete information flow, with the purpose of delivering to them what is true, as opposed to leaving them only to whatever Russians are delivering to them as fake news. And that just requires a small effort and some money. That's it. I mean, there's never enough money for these kind of things, but if we are actually serious about targeting people who live there, then we need to also be able to pay up from our budgets. So once again, the idea is good. It just depends on what can it be filled with, what will be the resources available to it, and to what extent it will be not just another exercise of joint, statements, but what concrete can actually come out of that.
Thank you very much. And if I didn't misinterpret again, now finally, thank you very much. An opportunity for you. Thanks for waiting.
Нарешті. Доброго дня ще раз. Вже третій раз чи четвертий. Україна на сьогодні більше за всі інші країни зазнала інформаційних атак, в тому числі фейкових атак і новин та пропаганди в рамках гібридної війни з боку Російської Федерації. Давайте подивимося. Інформаційна війна використовує переваги демократії найбільше. Це свобода слова, засобів масової інформації, де-факто руйнуючи демократичні інституції зсередини шляхом підриву довіри до них, змінюючи справжні цілі і завдання демократичних цілей. Україна ще до початку анексії Криму відчула інформаційні атаки та підміну реальності фейковістю. Ми спостерігали, як проти нас використовували досить дивний мікс пропаганди з Радянського Союзу і практик, що були розповсюджені Геббельсом за часів Третього Рейху. Розвиток інформаційних технологій значно спростив реалізацію інформаційних підривних акцій, введення нових наративів, фейкової реальності та міфів. Значно спрощений завдяки зменшенню кількості посередників між джерелом інформації та аудиторією. Це було дуже відчутно за часів гарячої фази війни на Донбасі та захопленням Криму. Коли з фейкових акаунтів здійснювалося розповсюдження відомостей, що підривало довіру до армії, військового керівництва, військового потенціалу та деморалізували населення нашої держави, а також розповсюджували фейки серед країн Західного світу. Сьогодні технології, відпрацьовані Росією в Україні, застосовуються в Західній Європі, Сполучених Штатах. Частина груп у соціальних мережах та інтернет-виданнях, інтернет-сайтах, зокрема, об'єднують прихильників виходу з ЄС, Франції, Італії, Нідерландів. Адмініструються та наповнюють громадянами Російської Федерації. Що призводить до цього, ми всі це бачимо. Ми переконані, що стратегії підривної інформаційної політики Росії в країнах ЄС та НАТО спрямована на поширення невпевненості, недовіри до владних інституцій в цих державах. Заохочення популізму та ідей крайнього спектру ультраправих та ультралівих сил, що може призвести до край негативних ситуацій в наших країнах. Де-факто такі заходи переслідують єдину ціль – підготовку до зміни не тільки правлячих сил та еліт, але й зміну свідомості громадян в цих країнах. Треба звернути увагу, що в той час, як зовнішня пропаганда Росії працює на руйнацію, підрив західних владних інституцій, недовіру до міжнародних інституцій та партнерів, сепаратизм, заохочення расизму та міжетнічної ворожнечі, ненависті, внутрішня пропаганда працює в протилежному напрямку – посилення довіри до владних еліт та керівництва, штучне створення зовнішнього ворога, протиставлення свій-чужий та інше. Оскільки інформаційні операції зловживають перевагами демократії, боротьба з ними дуже ускладнена. В даний момент Україна заборонила акредитацію російських представників пропагандистських медіа в державних організаціях. В свою чергу це ускладнило створення Росією фейкових новин, але не викорінило їх повністю. Незважаючи на те, що заборона доступу до соціальних мереж іноді вдається обходити за допомогою VPN-серверів, саме обмеження та сигнал держави про те небезпечність використання таких сервісів дозволив істотно скоротити кількість їх користувачів в Україні. Практика стала достатньо ефективною, адже зрозуміло, що за бажання кожен знайде шлях уникнути ці обмеження. Але в той же час блокування контенту для випадкових осіб, хто переглядає його, не маючи особливої мотивації, бажання та установки, є гарантованим і переключає канали. Надзвичайно важливою тенденцією боротьби з фейковими новинами з боку самих соціальних мереж, які також, в свою чергу, ускладнили доступи до цих сервісів. Також, на нашу думку, цікавою є перспектива застосування американської моделі іноземного агента до засобів масової інформації, що фінансується або адмініструється з території, що веде підривну роботу до нашої держави. Наприклад, щоб не ламати систему свободи слова заборонами, можна зобов'язати ЗМІ реєструватися іноземними агентами з відповідними позначками в ефірі або на його сайтах чи друкованій пресі. На кшталт написами «Куріння заборонено» або «Шкодить вашому здоров'ю». Потрібно пам'ятати, що джерела фейкових новин та пропаганди не є засобами масової інформації. І це потрібно доводити нашому населенню, нашим громадянам. Бо вони суперечать самим принципам ЗМІ, розповсюдження інформації, демократичним свободам та вольностям. Таким чином, боротьба з нею може включати будь-які засоби, у разі, якщо це зашкодить справжнім медіа та державам. Дякую.
Thank you very much for that. Can I maybe just add directly, since now we have interpretation for you, can I ask directly the question to which the two other panelists here have already replied, and this is the joint platform. What is it that you think from the Ukrainian perspective you could bring to the exercise, and what you would hope to get out of it if there would be a however designed then platform for these exchanges?
Для координації спільних зусиль, спільних дій нам потрібно створити єдину платформу, яка буде координуватися усіма країнами, які ведуть в цю спільноту, спеціальними службами і спеціальними сервісами. Але найбільше, що може робити антипропагандою, це економічний розвиток та показати нашим громадянам, що ми дійсно можемо і дійсно впливаємо на ситуацію і маємо перспективи у розвитку. тільки економічний розвиток спроможний переломити антипутінську пропаганду.
Okay. Mr. Ambassador, I think you wanted to react to one of these statements.
Thank you very much, and I strongly support the last comment there from our Ukrainian colleague about the importance of economic development in tackling disinformation. I just had three quick comments on the possibilities for further joint work on this. First of all, I'm actually quite optimistic. I'm actually quite optimistic that we have turned a corner on the issue of disinformation, because it is now so widely understood, so widely recognized that and we have these joint efforts that I think we are. I'm optimistic about being able to deal with it. I just wanted to say that there's a very big elephant in the room, as we say in English. A very big elephant in the room is the impact of disinformation inside Russia itself, and the legacy that will create. Whatever the political future of Russia, the legacy of the intense disinformation within Russia itself is something that we as Europe, as Russia's neighbor, will have to deal with for many years to come. The second thing I wanted to say was there's another fine line that we have to tread, which is about the legitimacy of difference of opinion within our societies. Difference of opinion is vital to our democracies, absolutely vital. And we must never find ourselves in the position of trying to control those opinions. If someone wants to believe a crazy conspiracy theory, that's their right. That is their right. I agree with what you said, Peter, that the solution is not to try to close down and shut down these sources of disinformation. We have much stronger tools to try and defeat that. And we've seen that in the UK as well. There are plenty of people in the UK who believe the conspiracy theories about Salisbury because they want to believe these conspiracy theories. But it doesn't mean that we are shutting down the outlets that are producing them. The last thing I wanted to say, and this is specifically about the joint work that the three states might do. There's research that has been published this morning and covered in the UK, which exposes that some of the GRU disinformation activity has been targeting teenagers. And we this morning have been talking about traditional media, mostly newspapers, television. We must not get left behind, because we can be absolutely sure that those that are attacking us are already thinking of the future, And where I think the three parliaments, the three countries represented here can make an enormous contribution to our common effort is in looking at the future and looking at future means of communication, future channels for disinformation, and how we respond to that. Because that is already, I think, where the debate has moved to. And we must not get left behind.
Thank you very much. Let's collect a last round of questions and comments from the audience, and then give the panel a possibility to wrap up. The lady in the second row, please.
Thank you very much. Like our colleague said, that on one hand, in order to fight against Russian propaganda, there is no way then to impose sanctions on pro-Russian media. On the other hand, these media immediately begin to appeal to the attack on democracy and freedom of speech and call to different international organizations. And this case is very common in Ukraine now. And how should we resist such a process? Thank you for.
Thank you. And then there was Mr. Gahler, and the question then there.
Yes, thank you very much. Adding to what the ambassador said, what we should not forget is, of course, the impact of the Russian propaganda on the Russians themselves. That is one aspect. And somebody else said, well, we have become too defensive. Yes, we are not staging counter-propaganda. That is true. But I really wonder why we are not managing, and with we, I mean all of us, not only inside the European Union, but also the neighboring countries in the East. Why are we not able to set up, perhaps in the form of an international foundation, and to have it really as an independent body, to set up something, if the Russians can set up Russia Today, something like Free Russia Today, not organized by us, but by these dozens or hundreds of Russian journalists in exile, from Ukraine to Europe to the US, from scientists, from experts, multifold ways in Russia that are silenced by their media. Why can we not set up something, a full-scale TV program? Full-scale meaning there's also entertainment, there are quiz shows, there is everything where a normal Russian audience would like to listen. And of course then, with those programs of real information that are totally ignored and that are neglected in Russia. I mean, when they are discussing their pension fund that is empty, why they have to reduce or to increase the pension age, I think with our information added, why is the pension fund empty? Because you engage in Crimea, you engage in the east of Ukraine, you engage in Syria, you keep Abkhazia, and you have to maintain all those issues. And that is why, for instance, the pension fund is empty. I mean, this link is never done, of course, in Russia. That is only one example where we could state facts and figures. How much does it cost to engage in Syria at the expense of the Russian health sector, infrastructure development, and all that? I think of really something where we would all together contribute to an international foundation, creating a good, attractive Russian-speaking TV channel that would not only go to Russia, but be worldwide available. All other efforts that we have seen. Yes, we have the Russian service of the BBC. Yes, we have Deutsche Welle, Radio France, Voice of America, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe. But that is something that addresses only a little audience, and it does not have the effect in the broad Russian public that could be a counter-publicity based on facts and entertainment. I would really argue that we should have an in-depth discussion how to set something like that up. What the Estonians have done for the Estonian-speaking, for their own Russian speakers, is one channel in the public broadcaster, but that is something for Estonia only. That is excellent to give them a chance to listen in Russian what is happening in Estonia. But that is not the way to attract really a broader Russian audience in Russia. I would really like us to think of such a project which impacts a lot of money, yes, but I think it's worthwhile.
There were two, first in the third or fourth row, and then in the first row afterwards, please.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, speakers, for your thoughts. I'm Levan, Foreign Affairs Advisor to the Speaker of the Georgian Parliament. While politicians are discussing this issue from a political perspective, I would look at it from the academic perspective. I think we all agree what's this propaganda already. But the key issue is to look at its structure as well, and then certainly to implement our policies accordingly. I think it's simple, if I can say so. Russian goal is not to convince somebody or to, I don't know, whatever, or convert, but it's to confuse people. To keep, to spread so many alternatives, as Mr. Ambassador and Mr. Galler mentioned, to spread so many alternatives to keep people and target audiences flailing into moral and very often factual relativity. And in this situation, people are unable to find cognitive basis for the government's policy action. And therefore, the result, the policies, government policies, I think, should be on several levels. First level is to keep fighting fake news, against fake news, and it can be increasing transparency or having fact checks and all these kind of things. Second thing is, as Mr. Ambassador mentioned, is to communicate government's policy, correctly communicating to the population what is the policy for and what is it about. And the third one is, I think we should not waste too much energy into just fighting against fake news, because in this case, we will forget the most important thing, to strengthen societies. Because as long as societies are vulnerable to such pressure, then it will be very easy for Russia to continue its policy effectively and difficult for us to counter it. And it can be investing in education and all these kind of things that politicians can be good at it. Because as long as societies see that policies deliver and deliver the positive results that that is different from what is Russia insisting on, then I think it will be much easier for government to do its job easily, let's say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And final comment from the audience. Gentleman in the first row, please.
Да, спасибо, господин ведущий. Я не владею английским. Если возможно, я обращусь на русском. Очень предметная дискуссия. Я очень, по крайней мере, для себя многое понял. Но, по-моему, да, избегается один аспект в этой дискуссии, что касается внутренней пропаганды, которая не менее вредная для демократических процессов, чем та же российская пропаганда, о которой мы говорим здесь уже примерно 2 часа. Есть и большие проблемы в Молдове с этим вопросом. Достаточно сказать, что для средств информации, которые которые
See whether now. Yeah, there is. Okay, now it's going. Please start.
А до сих пор перевод был? Не было перевода. Я начну сначала тогда. Мне хочется, чтобы поняли все, чтобы был перевод и на английском. Очень интересная дискуссия, предметная дискуссия. Для себя я много почерпнул информации. Но, по-моему, избегается один аспект, что касается внутренней пропаганды, которая не менее вредна для демократических процессов, не менее вредна в целом для общества. И я могу сказать, что в Молдове есть определенные проблемы с этим вопросом. Достаточно сказать, что 95%, такая информация прозвучала совсем недавно в молдавской прессе, примерно 95% средств массовой информации, которые пишут и говорят об другой точке зрения, нежели та, которая продвигает власти. 95% этих средств массовой информации практически финансируется из грантов. И если бы не было этого, они бы не смогли просто существовать. В конклюзии. Не в завершении, а хочу вывод сделать из этого, что, к сожалению, в Молдове нет экономической основы для существования свободной прессы. Или пресса, которая продвигает точку зрения властей, она финансируется или из публичных денег, или из партийных денег и так далее. Мне бы хотелось узнать у наших коллег из Грузии, из Украины, если у вас такая проблема, как финансируется пресса, которая не разделяет точку зрения властей. И хотелось бы знать, вот как у вас обстоят дела в ваших странах. И в общем я хотел бы сказать, что, по-моему, мы очень много комплиментов говорим сегодня друг другу. Я бы хотел, чтобы формат этой ассамблеи говорил открыто о тех проблемах, которые мы имеем, и это было бы очень правильно, иначе эти проблемы не решить. Это, наоборот, должно нас приблизить друг к другу и сплотить, потому что та цель, ради которой мы объединились, и я, и мои коллеги, мы разделяем, но это не означает, что мы не должны говорить о проблемах. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. So there were now some final questions, and I'm sure you also have other points in the general wrap-up. May I suggest that you just go ahead and we use the remaining time.
Thank you. I will just have 3 final points also in reference to what has been said here. I'll start with the idea of the Russian language TV. Well, we had that in 2010, 11, 12. We had that. We had the Russian language TV. It was called the First Caucasus TV. It was part of the Georgian National Broadcaster. We invited the Russian journalists in exile, as you said, and it was gaining popularity. Its quality maybe was not the top notch, but it was certainly increasing. And then in 2012, after the change of the government, it was closed. So, had it not been closed, by now probably we would have had a very strong basis for that kind of international joint endeavor, also including our neighboring countries. But unfortunately, that's the reality. So I think, and once again, it's better late than never. I would even today support the emergence of that kind of Russian language TV station, which is not necessarily supposed to be a propaganda channel, but something that is basing its work on Russian language, but also news, truth, reality. You've had a very good example of the pension fund. There are so many other examples, whether it is the lack of tourism in Abkhazia or in Crimea, and the reasons behind, etc. So there are many other things which can be covered in that way. Unfortunately, once again, the problem we've seen so far is a lack of vision and the leadership in the countries, but also, in a way, also in our EU partners. So that's one point. The other point I want to mention is the issue of the media and how they are struggling in the countries of the Eastern Partnership, including in Georgia. In Georgia, you have a major pro-Western, anti-government, on the record, TV station, which has had profound problems with the government. They are still struggling financially. Their capital and their property has been foreclosed, and the reason why they are acting today and not shut down is because the European Court of Human Rights intervened. Otherwise, they would not be acting today. In the recent weeks, we've had another media channel, which is, by the way, completely opposite to the Rustavi 2 channel, which I initially mentioned, from different perspective. I don't agree with the editorial policy, but they've also struggled financially, and they've also had problems from the government. So this is a serious problem in the Georgian case as well. And as I will repeat it one more time, the print media, unfortunately, is a problem in Georgia. Print media is very hard, for print media, it's very hard to sustain itself. So obviously then they have to look for all kinds of sources and incomes. And the third point, I think, to wrap these two up, I think one area that we are somehow, I wouldn't say forgetting, but we might have overlooked during this debate and discussion here, is how important it is for the countries, for these countries and for the governments particularly, to lead by example. Because if there are undemocratic practices it challenges and undermines the Western model of democracy, which is such a huge threat for Moscow. So whatever they do with the fake news to undermine the Western model of democracy, that is reinforced if these countries itself are not democratic and if they have problems with democracy, whether that is increasing authoritarianism, whether that is informal governance, whether that is artificially supporting those political parties from the side of the government who are pro-Russian at the expense of the pro-Western parties, or whether it is, for instance, what we've seen recently, where an opposition candidate wins an election and then the elections are annulled. So if you have these kind of practices, you don't really need fake news from Russia. This is already enough to have the message delivered to the people who have already become skeptical of the West. So I think we also need to pay attention to that. So strong institutions and democracy and leading by the example, I think, is the best way to be proactive. As the ambassador said, we need to be proactive. We do not necessarily need to follow and need to react. We can do it on our own. And once again, being a model, I wouldn't say model citizen, but the model democracy helps a lot. But if you have all these problems, then it's very easy for Russia to use it as a fertile ground. Every problem that we see in Georgia, in Moldova, or in Ukraine with regard to democracy or declining democracy is then very well used by Russian propaganda instruments, for instance, in the occupied regions, where they say, so is this what you really want? Isn't it better to be in a strong state like Russia is? So, thank you.
Thank you very much. The first, and then.
I would also have 3 points as final remarks. Of course, I guess a local press is a local regional press is a problem for all of our 3 countries. And even last week we in the parliament discussed about financing and finding way to financing and support the people that invest and that invest in the local media. Just to be clear, I never spoke about Russian-speaking mass media, because in Moldova we are supporting Russian-speaking. We have Gagauz mass media in Gagauz or Ukrainian language. So it's not about speaking. Even we have Sputnik in Moldova because it's produced in Moldova. We only forbidden news that are produced in Russian Federation, not speaking, not that are produced in Moldova. Second point is continuing what Mr. Ambassador said before about future. In 2 or 3 years, this information will have totally different perspectives. Of course, everything is changing. We had before the message, the channel, and the person. Now it's possible to send the same message to a lot of people having different framing for each of it. So I guess that this discussion in 3 years or 4, it will be totally different, and we'll speak more about the technical and the cyber part and how these messages are made to get to their targets, so-called. And my third point is continuing the discussion about the trilateral Stratcom. I guess we have the minimum what we can do, and we have a bigger format. The minimum of Stratcom, as I see, is having a platform of communication and changing information. The maximum for me, it is having a body, having cells in each country that will not only communicate, that will follow a common strategic communication agenda that is discussed, approved by everyone, and these cells will make sure for this agenda to implement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Shabbat.
Щодо України, то в нас створено вже суспільне мовлення, яке фінансується з державного бюджету. Також йде програма по роздержавленню місцевих телеканалів, це по всім регіонам, які в наступному часі будуть конкурувати з тими телеканалами, які є олігархічними, або фінансуються олігархами, або росіянами, чи через інші структури. Більш того, хочу сказати, що на даний момент на телеканали припадає вже менше відсотків глядачів, ніж в інтернет-медіа. на даний момент більше 50% вже користуються інтернетом більше, ніж користуються телебаченням. Тому більш на це потрібно приділяти увагу, ніж ми приділяємо зараз телебаченню. Дякую.
Thank you very much for these closing remarks. We are running already late, so to close up, I have to firstly thank you all for your contributions, for waiting that everybody could express himself in the appropriate language. Thank you very much for your contributions. It's quite obvious we've only touched upon many of the issues which will have to be followed up and which for sure will be followed up. Thank you very much for helping us. Thank you very much for listening this morning. And there is now lunch at the Shota Rustaveli Hall, ground floor of this building. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.